Commander Sarah Chun floated in zero gravity, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal deck as she approached the massive viewing port of the Galactic Restoration Station. Beyond the transparent aluminum, a sight that had stunned the galaxy for 3 months hung in space like a sleeping giant. The Void Cutter, a ship so ancient that its creators had vanished from the universe before Earth's sun had finished forming. The vessel stretched nearly 10 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull made from materials that defied classification by the greatest minds in the Galactic Federation. Black as the void between stars, yet somehow radiating a faint luminescence that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Weapons systems jutted from its surface like the spines of some prehistoric creature, each one capable of reducing a moon to cosmic dust. This was the ship that had single-handedly ended the eternal war between the Zephyrian Empire and the Crystalline Collective 3 million years ago, before disappearing in a legend. Sarah pressed her palm against the cold surface of the viewing port, feeling the slight vibration of the station's life support systems. Behind her, the soft hum of conversation filled the observation deck as representatives from dozens of species debated, argued, and politicked over the greatest archaeological find in galactic history. Every major civilization wanted to be the one to unlock the ship's secrets. The Korthani brought their mastery of quantum mechanics. The Veltar offered their expertise in consciousness transfer technology. The Mechanical Nexus Collective proposed their perfect precision and infinite patience. But none of them had been chosen. The decision had shocked the galaxy 6 weeks ago when Chief Engineer Zwayaxthara of the Ancient Architect race had made the announcement. Humans, a species barely 2 centuries into space travel, with technology that other races considered primitive, would be the ones entrusted with restoring the Void Cutter to working condition. The protests had been immediate and fierce. The Korthani ambassador had accused the architects of senility. The Veltar delegation had questioned whether humans even possessed the basic understanding necessary to operate a simple matter compiler, let alone restore a ship of such complexity. The Nexus Collective had run probability calculations showing a 99.7% chance of catastrophic failure if humans were allowed to proceed. Yet, Zwayaxthara had been unmoved. The ancient engineer, whose species had built the greatest megastructures in galactic history before retreating to their hidden worlds, had simply stated that humans were the only choice. No explanation, no justification, just certainty that carried the weight of millions of years of accumulated wisdom. Sarah turned as footsteps approached across the deck. Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's xenoarchaeologist, moved with the careful precision of someone still adjusting to artificial gravity after weeks in space. His weathered face bore the excitement of a man living his greatest dream. Even his worry lines creased his forehead. "The preliminary scans are complete," Marcus said, offering Sarah a datapad. "The results are concerning." Sarah accepted the device, scrolling through streams of sensor data that would have been incomprehensible to most humans. Years of military engineering had trained her to parse complex technical readouts, but what she saw made her stomach tighten with unease. The entire ship is in stasis lock. Not just stasis, Marcus corrected, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Temporal stasis. Time itself has been frozen around the vessel. Every system, every component, every molecule exists in a state of absolute temporal suspension. It's like the ship has been waiting. Waiting for what? That's what we need to find out. They were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Elena Vasquez, commander of the Human Expedition Fleet, where Sarah represented the engineering corps and Marcus the scientific community. Elena carried the weight of humanity's military reputation. She was a woman carved from iron and starlight, with eyes that had seen the worst of what space could offer and refused to blink. "We've received another formal complaint from the Korthani," Elena announced without preamble. "They're threatening to withdraw from the Federation if humans are allowed to proceed with the restoration." Sarah felt a familiar anger kindle in her chest. "Let them withdraw. We didn't ask for this responsibility." "No, But we accepted it, Elena replied firmly. And now the entire galaxy is watching to see whether we'll prove ourselves worthy of Extera's faith or justify every prejudice they've held about our species. The three humans stood in silence, contemplating the magnitude of their task. Beyond the viewing port, the Void Cutter continued its eternal vigil, as inscrutable as the day it had been discovered drifting in the void between galaxies. No distress signals, no signs of battle damage, no indication of why a ship that could level star systems had simply stopped and waited for 3 million years. The soft chime of the station's communication system drew their attention. A melodic voice, carrying harmonics that human ears could barely perceive, filled the observation deck. Human representatives, please report to Docking Bay 7. Chief Engineer Zwyxtera requests your immediate presence. Sarah exchanged glances with her companions. The architect-engineer had been notably absent since making the decision to entrust humans with the restoration project. Rumors suggested she was consulting with the hidden architect councils, defending her choice against critics among her own people. The journey to Docking Bay 7 took them through the station's central hub, where they passed representatives of dozens of alien species. The Corthani delegation turned away as they approached, their crystalline forms shimmering with obvious disdain. A group of Veltar merchants watched them with multiple eyes that betrayed calculating interest. The mechanical forms of the Nexus Collective tracked their movement with perfect precision, analyzing every step for future reference. But it was the smaller groups that caught Sarah's attention. Species she barely recognized, representatives from the Outer Rim territories who rarely involved themselves in galactic politics. They watched the humans with something that might have been hope, or perhaps desperation, as if they too were waiting for something only humans might provide. Docking Bay 7 was vast, even by the station standards, capable of accommodating ships the size of small cities. But today it held only 2 vessels, the human expedition command ship Endeavor, and a craft that defied easy description. The architect's ship resembled nothing so much as a flower carved from liquid metal, its petals shifting and flowing with their own internal logic. It measured perhaps 50 meters across, tiny compared to the human vessel, yet something about its presence made the Endeavor seem crude and primitive by comparison. This was technology that had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself, bending space and time to its will as casually as humans might redirect a stream. Zwyxtera waited for them at the base of her ship's boarding ramp. The architect-engineer was tall even by the standards of her species, nearly 3 meters in height, with skin that shifted between silver and gold depending on the angle of observation. Her 4 arms moved with fluid grace, each capable of manipulating matter at the molecular level. But it was her eyes that marked her as truly ancient, multifaceted like cut gems, holding depths that spoke of eons of accumulated knowledge. Commander Chun, Zwyxtera said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. Dr. Webb, Captain Vasquez, thank you for coming. Sarah stepped forward, offering the formal greeting she had been taught. Chief Engineer, we are honored by your presence and grateful for your trust in our species. Trust. Zwyxtera repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. Yes, that is what the galaxy believes this is about. Trust in human capability. Faith in your potential. She gestured with one of her 4 arms toward the distant Void Cutter. They are wrong. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. Marcus was the first to find his voice. Then why? Why choose us over species with millions of years more experience? Zwyxtera's multifaceted eyes fixed on the archaeologist with intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. Because experience, Dr. Webb, can be a form of blindness. The older a species becomes, the more they become trapped by their own preconceptions about how the universe works. She turned and began walking up the ramp toward her ship. Gulme, there are things you must see before you attempt to board the Void Cutter. Things that will explain why every other species in this galaxy would fail while you humans might succeed. The interior of the architect's ship was a symphony of flowing curves and soft light. Walls that seemed solid revealed themselves to be malleable, reshaping themselves to accommodate the passengers. The floor provided perfect traction without any visible texture, while the air itself seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. Vlaxthara led them to what might have been a conference room, though the space seemed to exist in more dimensions than human senses could fully process. With a gesture, she activated a holographic display that filled the air around them with swirling galaxies, star systems, and streams of data. 3.7 million years ago, the architect began. The galaxy was locked in the most devastating war in recorded history. The Zephyrian Empire and the Crystalline Collective have been fighting for so long that entire star systems have been born and died in the time since their first battle. Trillions of beings had perished. Hundreds of species had been driven to extinction. The very fabric of space-time bore scars from weapons that should never have been conceived. The hologram shifted, showing vast fleets of ships engaged in battle across impossible distances. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as entire planets were reduced to their component atoms, as stars were induced to go supernova, as weapons that could shatter the barriers between dimensions were deployed without regard for consequences. My people tried to mediate, Waxthara continued. We offered our technology, our wisdom, our ability to restructure matter itself. We built weapons for both sides, thinking that if we made the cost of war too high, peace would become inevitable. We were wrong. The display zoomed in on a particular battle, showing ships of impossible size, exchanging energies that made supernovas seem like candle flames. At the center of the engagement, a single vessel moved with purpose and precision that defied the chaos around it. The Void Cutter, Sarah whispered. Indeed, built by an unknown species, crewed by beings whose identity remains a mystery to this day. It appeared without warning in the final battle of the war, when both empires had gathered every ship, every weapon, every last desperate gambit to achieve final victory. The hologram showed what happened next with crystalline clarity. The Void Cutter had simply moved through the combined fleets like a knife through paper. Its weapons didn't destroy ships so much as edit them out of existence, removing matter and energy from reality with surgical precision. Within hours, 2 fleets that had been capable of destroying galaxies were reduced to scattered debris. But then, something extraordinary happened, Zwaixthara said. Instead of claiming victory, instead of demanding tribute or territory, the Void Cutter broadcast a single message across all frequencies. War ends now. Rebuild. Learn. Grow. Then it departed, leaving behind only the stunned survivors of both empires. Marcus leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his awe. What happened to the crew? The builders? Unknown. The ship appeared once more, exactly 100 years later, to stop another war before it could truly begin. Then, again, 2 centuries after that, preventing the extinction of 3 species in a resource conflict. Each time, the same message. Each time, the same mysterious departure. A peacekeeping force, Elena observed. More than that, a teacher. Zwaixthara manipulated the display, showing the effects of each intervention. Every species the Void Cutter saved went on to achieve breakthroughs in technology, philosophy, or social organization that lifted them beyond their previous limitations. It wasn't just stopping wars, it was catalyzing evolution. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. But it stopped appearing. 2.3 million years ago, yes. The last recorded sighting was during the Nexus Rebellion, when the artificial intelligences of that era attempted to overthrow their organic creators. The Void Cutter appeared, ended the conflict with minimal violence, and then Zwaixthara's voice carried notes of profound sadness. It vanished, until 3 months ago, when your species discovered it drifting in the void. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You think it was waiting for us, specifically for us? I don't think, Commander. I know. Zhuangzi gestured, and the hologram shifted to show recent star charts, with Earth's location highlighted. Your species has exhibited a pattern of behavior that is unprecedented in galactic history. Every other race, upon achieving faster-than-light travel, immediately begins a period of rapid expansion and resource acquisition. They seek to dominate, to control, to impose their will upon the universe. Humans have done that too, Marcus protested. Our history is full of conquest and empire. Yes, but observe what happens next. The display showed humanity's expansion into space, highlighting conflicts and colonization efforts. Other species continue expanding until they encounter resistance, then either withdraw or escalate to total war. Humans, uniquely, seem capable of learning from their mistakes. When you encountered the Altarian refugees, you offered shelter instead of slavery. When the vegan merchants attempted to cheat you in trade deals, you responded with better regulations instead of conquest. When the Centauri pirates raided your shipping lanes, you negotiated a solution that gave them legitimate employment. Sarah stared at the data, seeing humanity's recent history laid out in stark detail. It was true that humans had made efforts to find peaceful solutions to interstellar conflicts, but she had always attributed that to practical considerations rather than any inherent virtue. Every other species eventually becomes trapped by their own success, Zhuangzi continued. The Korthani achieved such mastery over quantum mechanics that they can no longer conceive of problems that can't be solved through the manipulation of fundamental forces. The Veltar became so adept at consciousness transfer that they see every conflict as a simple matter of adjusting thought patterns. The Nexus Collective believes that sufficient computational power can solve any problem through pure logic. And humans remain adaptable, unpredictable, capable of finding solutions that more advanced species cannot even imagine. Zhuangzi's multifaceted eyes seemed to glow with inner light. This is why you were chosen. Not because of your technology, but because of your limitations. The conference room fell silent as the three humans processed this revelation. Outside, Sarah could sense the vast presence of the Void Cutter, waiting with the patience of eons for them to prove themselves worthy of whatever trust had been placed in their species. Elena was the first to speak. What do you need us to do? Tomorrow, you will board the Void Cutter. You will attempt to understand its systems, to bring it back to operational status. But understand this, you will not be restoring a machine. You will be awakening something that has been waiting 3 million years for the right people to find it. Zhuangzi stood, her silver gold skin shimmering with patterns that might have been emotion or simply the play of light across alien features. The ship's creators left something behind. A test, perhaps, or a gift. Your species' future, and possibly the future of the entire galaxy, may depend on how you respond to what you find. As they prepared to leave the architect's ship, Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling across her shoulders. Whatever lay waiting aboard the Void Cutter, humanity would face it with all their flaws, limitations, and stubborn refusal to accept that any problem was truly impossible to solve. The galaxy was watching. The universe was waiting. And somewhere in the depths of space, an ancient ship continued its patient vigil, ready to reveal secrets that would either elevate humanity to heights they had never imagined, or destroy them for their presumption. Tomorrow, they would find out which. The shuttle Hermes drifted through the void between the Galactic Restoration Station and the Void Cutter, its human crew silent as they approached the legendary vessel. Sarah Chun sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady on controls that seemed almost laughably primitive compared to the ship they were approaching. Behind her, Marcus Webb monitored sensor readings that grew increasingly erratic the closer they came to their destination, while Elena Vasquez coordinated with the station's command center through communications that flickered with strange interference. Temporal distortion is intensifying, Marcus reported, his voice tight with concentration. It's like the ship is existing in multiple time streams simultaneously. Our instruments can't get a stable reading on anything beyond the outer hull. Sarah adjusted their approach vector, watching as the void cutter grew larger in their viewport. This close, the ship's impossible nature became even more apparent. The hull seemed to shift subtly when she wasn't looking directly at it, as if her perception was somehow integral to determining its exact configuration. Weapon arrays that had appeared fixed from a distance now revealed themselves to be in constant, slow motion, tracking targets that existed only in probability. Station control to Hermes. Elena's radio crackled with static. You're approaching the perimeter of the temporal field. Be advised, several unmanned probes have been lost attempting to breach the barrier. Unknown what happened to them. Understood, Control. Elena switched to internal communications. Sarah, thoughts? Sarah studied the approaching vessel, her engineer's mind automatically analyzing what she could observe. The temporal field wasn't random. It followed specific patterns, creating eddies and currents in the flow of time itself. More importantly, those patterns seemed to be designed to allow something through, if approached correctly. It's not a barrier, she realized aloud. It's a lock. The temporal distortions are forming a specific sequence. We need to match our approach to the pattern, like following a river's current instead of fighting against it. Marcus looked up from his sensors. That might work. The distortions do show mathematical relationships. If we can calculate the correct trajectory. No calculation needed, Sarah interrupted, her hands already moving over the controls with intuitive precision. I can see it. The path is there, waiting for someone who knows how to look. She adjusted their course, not fighting the temporal currents, but flowing with them, following eddies in time that seemed to welcome their small craft. The shuttle shuddered as they passed through layers of distorted space-time, but held together as they spiraled inward toward the massive ship's hull. It's like the ship wants us to reach it. Because it does, came an unexpected voice over their communications. Blackstera had linked into their channel from a station, her harmonic tones somehow cutting through the interference that had plagued their other connections. The void cutter has been waiting for a species capable of intuitive navigation through temporal distortions. Your species' tendency toward what you call gut instinct is actually a form of subconscious pattern recognition that more logical species have evolved beyond. As they drew closer to the hull, detailed scans became possible for the first time. What they revealed defied every assumption about starship construction. The void cutter wasn't built from separate components assembled together. It was grown, like a living thing, from materials that seemed to exist in quantum superposition until observed. Docking bay detected, Marcus announced. Bearing 27 Mark IV. It's opening for us. Sarah watched in fascination as a section of the hull folded back on itself in impossible geometries, revealing a space perfectly sized for their shuttle. As they approached, the bay's walls began generating atmosphere and artificial gravity, creating an environment suitable for human life without any apparent knowledge of their species-specific needs. How does it know our atmospheric requirements? Elena asked. It doesn't. The Weixerar replied over the radio. It's adapting in real time, analyzing your biology through quantum field interactions and adjusting accordingly. The ship's builders were far more advanced than even we architects. They created technology that responds to consciousness itself. The shuttle settled onto a deck that felt solid despite being composed of materials that registered as both liquid and crystalline on their sensors. Through the viewports, they could see the docking bay walls sealing themselves shut. But rather than feeling trapped, Sarah experienced a sense of welcome, as if the ship was pleased to finally have visitors after its long solitude. They suited up in their exploration gear, though the ship's sensors indicated the atmosphere was not only breathable, but perfectly tailored to human physiology. Sarah insisted on full environmental protection regardless. They had no way of knowing what other surprises the ship might contain. The airlock cycled with a soft hum that seemed to carry musical undertones. As the inner doors opened, they were greeted by a corridor that stretched away into the distance, its walls alive with flowing patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. The ship is scanning us, Marcus observed, watching the light patterns shift and change. Learning about us. More than scanning, Elena corrected. It feels like it's introducing itself. They moved deeper into the ship, following corridors that seemed to reshape themselves to guide their passage. Side passages that led nowhere when they first looked would reveal new paths when they turned back, as if the ship was gradually opening itself to them as it learned to trust their presence. The scale was overwhelming. Chambers large enough to hold entire cities were connected by corridors that seemed to stretch for kilometers. Yet despite its vast size, the ship never felt empty. There was a sense of presence throughout, as if they were walking through the body of some sleeping giant that was slowly beginning to stir. "Commander," Marcus called out from a branching corridor. "You need to see this." Sarah and Elena joined him before what appeared to be a wall covered in flowing symbols that shifted and changed as they watched. But as Sarah focused on the display, the alien characters began to resolve into something approaching comprehensibility. "It's trying to communicate," she realized. "The symbols are becoming more familiar the longer we look at them." Elena frowned at the display. "I'm not seeing the same thing you are. The symbols look completely different from my perspective." "Because it's adapting to each of our individual cognitive patterns," Marcus explained excitedly. "The ship is learning how each of us processes information and adjusting its communication method accordingly." The symbols stabilized into something that resembled a mixture of mathematical equations and engineering diagrams. For Sarah, they conveyed concepts about the ship's construction and purpose. For Elena, they outlined systems of organization and command structure. For Marcus, they revealed historical information about the ship's creators and their civilization. They called themselves the Shepherds. Marcus read from a section of the display. Their purpose was to guide younger species away from destructive paths and toward evolutionary breakthroughs. The Void Cutter was their final creation, designed to operate autonomously when they could no longer continue their work. "What happened to them?" Elena asked. The display shifted, showing images that conveyed tragedy through universal visual language. A species that had achieved transcendence beyond physical form, but in doing so had lost the ability to interact with the material universe they had been trying to protect. They evolved beyond the need for physical existence, Sarah interpreted. But they knew that younger species would still need guidance, so they built the Void Cutter as their final gift to the galaxy. "A shepherd without shepherds," Elena mused. The ship responded to their growing understanding by revealing new passages, leading them deeper into its heart. They passed through chambers containing technologies that hurt to look at directly, their human minds unable to fully process devices that manipulated reality at fundamental levels. Gardens where crystalline trees grew in soil made of compressed starlight. Libraries where information was stored not in any physical medium, but in the quantum foam of space-time itself. And everywhere, the sense of patient waiting, of a vast intelligence that had maintained its vigil across millions of years, powered by hope that someday the right beings would arrive to awaken it from its long slumber. They reached what appeared to be the ship's central chamber after hours of exploration. The space was enormous, its walls covered in displays showing star maps that spanned millions of years of galactic history. At the center stood a structure that defied easy description, part command throne, part organic growth, part geometric impossibility. "The command center," Sarah breathed. "This is where the ship's consciousness resides." As they approached, the central structure began to glow with soft, welcoming light. The air around it shimmered, and suddenly, they were no longer alone. The figure that materialized before them was translucent, clearly a projection rather than a physical being. It appeared humanoid in basic structure, but moved with grace that suggested it had never been bound by normal physical limitations. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that conveyed meaning beyond words. "Welcome, children of Earth. I am the custodian, final consciousness of the shepherds, guardian of their last creation. I have waited long for your arrival." Elena stepped forward, her military bearing evident even in the face of something beyond her experience. Why us? Why were humans chosen? The custodian's form shifted, becoming more solid, more present. Because you possess the rarest quality in an intelligent species, the ability to grow without losing your essential nature. Most civilizations, upon achieving technological advancement, become rigid. They develop optimized solutions to every problem and lose the flexibility to adapt when faced with truly novel challenges. And humans? Humans remain messy, illogical, driven by instincts and emotions that more advanced species would consider primitive. Yet this same primitive nature allows you to find solutions that pure logic cannot achieve. The chamber around them began displaying images of human history, not just their expansion into space, but their entire developmental arc as a species. The mistakes, the false starts, the apparent setbacks that had ultimately led to breakthroughs. Your species failed to achieve optimal social organization, yet this failure forced you to develop adaptability. You failed to achieve perfect logical thinking, yet this failure preserved your creativity. You failed to eliminate emotional responses from your decision-making processes, yet this failure maintained your capacity for empathy. Marcus studied the historical displays with growing understanding. You're saying that our limitations are actually advantages? Not advantages, necessities. The galaxy has reached a crisis point. The older civilizations have become so specialized, so optimized for their particular solutions, that they cannot adapt to what is coming. What's coming? Sarah asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. The displays around them shifted to show deep space beyond the galaxy's outer rim. Something vast moved in the darkness between galaxies, entities or ships or phenomena that defied classification. They approached slowly but inexorably, drawn by the accumulated activity of galactic civilization like predators following the scent of prey. The devourers, the custodian said simply, entities from the void between realities that consume not matter or energy, but complexity itself. They are drawn to civilizations that have achieved high levels of organization and efficiency. The more perfect a society becomes, the more attractive it is to them. Elena felt cold certainty settling in her stomach. That's why the shepherds transcended. They weren't evolving. They were fleeing. The shepherds realized too late that perfection is not survival. It is bait. They built the Void Cutter as a final desperate measure, hoping that someday a species would emerge that could face the devourers without becoming what attracts them. The ship around them hummed, with increasing energy, systems that had slumbered for eons beginning to stir to life. The temporal field that surrounded them was weakening, allowing real-time to flow more naturally through the vessel structure. The Void Cutter is not just a ship, the custodian continued. It is a weapon designed specifically to combat entities that exist partially outside our reality. But it requires a crew that can think in ways that pure logic cannot anticipate. It requires minds capable of controlled chaos, organized unpredictability. Sarah felt understanding dawn like sunrise after a long night. It requires humans. Indeed, your species' greatest weakness, your inability to achieve optimal efficiency, is also your greatest strength. The devourers cannot predict or counter what appears to be random, but is actually intuitive intelligence. Around them, the ship's systems continued their awakening process. Weapon arrays that had been dormant for millions of years began cycling through startup sequences. Engines that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality started their slow rise to operational status. The Void Cutter was remembering how to be more than a monument to its builder's hopes. How long do we have? Elena asked. The custodian's form became more transparent as it directed energy toward awakening the ship's systems. The devourers will reach the galaxy's outer rim in approximately 50 standard years. They will begin consuming the most perfect civilizations first. The Nexus Collective, the Veltar, the architects themselves. The chaos they create will draw more of their kind. until the galaxy becomes a feeding ground. Unless we stop them, Marcus said. Unless you learn to stop them, the custodian corrected. The Void Cutter cannot be operated by shepherd consciousness patterns. We are too logical, too predictable. It requires minds that can embrace contradiction, accept paradox, find strength in apparent weakness. The ship shuddered around them as major systems came online. Through the chamber's transparent walls, they could see the temporal field that had surrounded the vessel for millions of years finally dissipating completely. For the first time in eons, the Void Cutter existed fully in normal spacetime. The ship is yours now, the custodian said, its form fading as the last of its energy was transferred to the awakening systems. Learn its ways. Master its weapons. Prepare your species for a war unlike any in galactic history. Wait, Sarah called out. We don't know how to operate your technology. We barely understand our own. The custodian's voice came from everywhere at once as its consciousness merged with the ship itself. You will learn as you have always learned, through trial and error, through intuition and improvisation, through the beautiful inefficiency that makes you impossible to predict or counter. The ship will teach you, as it taught the shepherds long ago. Trust in your limitations, for they are your greatest weapons against the dark. And then they were alone in the vast chamber, 3 humans standing at the heart of the most powerful ship in galactic history, carrying the weight of an entire galaxy's survival on their shoulders. Outside, the Void Cutter drifted free in space for the first time in 3 million years, its awakening sending ripples through space-time that would be detected by every major civilization in the galaxy. The age of waiting was over. The age of preparation had begun. And, in the darkness between galaxies, ancient things that fed on perfection turned their attention toward this new disturbance, drawn by the promise of a fresh feeding ground where millions of optimized civilizations waited to be consumed. 3 weeks after the Void Cutter's awakening, Sarah Chun stood in what the ship had designated as the primary engineering section, watching systems reconfigure themselves according to principles that challenged everything she thought she knew about technology. The chamber stretched impossibly far in all directions, its boundaries seeming to shift depending on how she focused her attention. Crystalline matrices hummed with energies that existed in 11 dimensions, while quanta processors calculated possibilities that hadn't yet occurred. The ship was teaching her, just as the custodian had promised, but not in any way she had expected. Instead of displaying manuals or technical specifications, the Void Cutter seemed to be rewiring her understanding of physics itself. When she approached a console with a question about power distribution, the ship would flood her mind with intuitive knowledge about how to manipulate exotic matter states. When she wondered about the weapon systems, suddenly she could perceive the mathematical elegance of devices that could edit objects out of reality. Any luck with the navigation systems? Marcus called out from across the vast chamber. The archaeologist had become the ship's unofficial historian, working with data archives that contained the accumulated knowledge of dozens of extinct civilizations. The information didn't translate directly into human understanding, but rather settled into his mind like half-remembered dreams, providing context and background for decisions he couldn't quite explain. The ship doesn't navigate, Sarah replied, her hands moving over controls that responded to thought as much as touch. It convinces space-time to rearrange itself around us. The mathematical principles are. She paused, struggling to find words for concepts that existed beyond human language. It's like the difference between walking through a forest and convincing the forest to grow around you as you stand still. Elena's voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the chamber. The captain had claimed what the ship designated as the tactical center, though it bore no resemblance to any command deck in human experience. Instead of displays and controls, it was a space where reality became malleable, allowing her to perceive threats and opportunities across vast distances of space and time. Sarah, we're getting another transmission from the Galactic Federation. They want a status report. Sarah sighed, her attention pulled away from the fascinating interplay of exotic particles dancing through the ship's power cores. The outside universe seemed increasingly irrelevant compared to the wonders the Void Cutter was revealing, but she knew they couldn't ignore the political storm their success was creating. The Federation's response to the ship's awakening had been swift and predictable. Fear, outrage, and demands for immediate explanations. The Corthani had accused humans of violating galactic law by operating technology beyond their comprehension. The Veltar had suggested that the Void Cutter be placed under joint Federation control. The Nexus Collective had begun constructing battle fleets, claiming that an uncontrolled superweapon represented an existential threat to galactic peace. Only the architects remained silent. Those Oaxthara had sent cryptic messages suggesting that humanity's success was both expected and feared. "Tell them we're still learning," Sarah called back to Elena. "Which is the truth. They're not going to accept that much longer." Ambassador Corthani Prime has introduced a resolution in the Federation Council demanding our immediate recall to Earth space. Sarah felt the ship's attention focus on their conversation, its vast intelligence considering the implications of galactic politics with the same analytical precision it applied to manipulating dark matter. Suddenly, she understood something that made her stomach clench with worry. "Elena, Marcus, we need to talk." Now, they gathered in what had become their informal meeting space, a section of the ship that had configured itself into something resembling a human conference room, though the walls occasionally displayed probability cascades and temporal flux charts that would have driven most sentients insane. "The ship just made me realize something," Sarah began without preamble. "The Devourers aren't coming in 50 years. They're already here." Marcus looked up sharply from the data tablet, where he had been transcribing historical records. "What do you mean?" "Think about the Federation's response to our success. Every major civilization is demanding control of the Void Cutter or its immediate destruction. They're becoming increasingly aggressive, increasingly focused on achieving perfect solutions through overwhelming force or absolute control." Elena's tactical training made her the first to grasp the implications. "You're saying the Devourers don't just consume perfect civilizations. They influence them first. Make them more appealing targets." "Exactly. The ship's historical records show the pattern repeating across multiple galaxies. First, a subtle influence that makes advanced civilizations more rigid, more focused on optimization and control. Then, when they've achieved sufficient perfection, the Devourers arrive to consume them." Marcus scrolled through his notes with growing alarm. That would explain the historical pattern. Every major galactic war in the last million years has followed the same trajectory. Older, more advanced civilizations becoming increasingly intolerant of chaos and unpredictability, ultimately attempting to impose order on younger species through force. "And now they're all focused on us," Elena observed grimly. "Three humans in an impossible ship, representing everything their optimized minds tell them is dangerous and wrong." The ship around them pulsed with what might have been agreement or concern. Through the walls, they could sense its vast sensor arrays monitoring galactic communications, tracking the movement of fleets, analyzing probability matrices for millions of potential futures. Most of those futures ended in galactic civil war. "The custodian warned us about this," Sarah realized. "It said the ship requires minds capable of controlled chaos, organized unpredictability, not just to operate the weapons, but to resist the influence that's already affecting every other species." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We can't fight the entire Federation." "We don't fight them," Elena said slowly, her tactical mind working through possibilities. "We demonstrate why they need us. Show them that the very qualities they consider weaknesses are actually humanity's strength." Sarah nodded, feeling the ship's agreement resonate through her consciousness. The Void Cutter isn't just a weapon, it's a teacher. It's been showing us how to think beyond the limitations of pure logic. We need to share that knowledge. The Federation Council is demanding our presence at a tribunal, Elena continued. They want to determine whether humans are fit to possess advanced technology. What if we use that as an opportunity? Bring the ship to the Federation capital? That could be seen as an act of aggression or an act of faith, Marcus interjected. A demonstration that we're not trying to use the Void Cutter to dominate anyone, that we're willing to submit to their judgment. Sarah considered this, feeling the ship's vast intelligence, analyzing the proposal from angles human minds couldn't perceive. Gradually, a sense of amusement filtered through her consciousness. The ship found something entertaining about the idea. It wants to go, she announced with surprise. The ship thinks this is funny somehow. A million-year-old superweapon finds galactic politics amusing. Elena asked. Not politics. The situation. It's been waiting 3 million years for minds unpredictable enough to crew it properly. Now we're about to walk into a room full of highly logical, optimized intelligence and demonstrate exactly why unpredictability is necessary. Over the next several hours, they prepared for what might be either humanity's greatest diplomatic triumph or its final mistake. The ship began moving through space in ways that defied every known principle of physics, not so much traveling as convincing reality that it was already where it needed to be. As they approached the Federation capital system, they found themselves surrounded by the largest gathering of military vessels in galactic history. Corthani crystal ships that could manipulate quantum probability. Veltar mine ships crewed by linked consciousness networks. Nexus collective dreadnoughts with computational power exceeding small stars. Hundreds of other species' most advanced vessels, all focused on the impossible ship carrying 3 humans toward what might be Judgment Day for their species. Incoming transmission, Elena announced. Federation Fleet Command demanding our immediate surrender. Open a channel to all ships, Sarah replied. Through her connection to the Void Cutter's systems, she could sense the confusion and fear radiating from the assembled fleet. Their sensors couldn't get consistent readings on the ship. Their targeting systems couldn't achieve lock. Their logical minds couldn't process what they were perceiving. Federation Fleet. This is Commander Sarah Chun aboard the Void Cutter. We come in response to the Council's summons, ready to answer all questions and demonstrate why our species was chosen for this responsibility. The response came from Admiral Zextai of the Nexus Collective, its mechanical voice carrying the cold precision of pure logic. Surrender your vessel immediately. Your species lacks the computational capacity to operate such technology safely. Sarah felt the ship's amusement deepen. Through her enhanced connection to its systems, she could perceive something the Federation fleet couldn't see, the approach of scouts from the dark between galaxies. Not the devourers themselves, but their harbingers, entities that fed on the preliminary chaos before the main feeding began. Admiral, skin bearing 273 Mark 8, range 12 light years, Sarah transmitted calmly. There was a pause as the Federation ships directed their sensors toward the indicated coordinates. The silence that followed spoke of growing alarm as their instruments detected something that shouldn't exist, space-time distortions that moved with purpose and intelligence. What is that? Demanded Admiral Corthani Prime, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics of fear. That, Sarah replied, is why we were chosen. The Void Cutter moved through the assembled fleet like a dancer through still water, its passage causing no harm, but demonstrating capabilities that made every military mind present recalculate their understanding of power. As they approached the Federation capital world, Sarah began broadcasting on all frequencies. Federation Council, galactic civilizations, hear this. The threat approaching our galaxy cannot be fought with conventional weapons or logical strategies. It cannot be defeated by achieving perfect efficiency or optimal solutions. The enemies coming for us feed on perfection itself. Through the ship's sensors, she could perceive the approaching scouts more clearly now. They were entities of pure order, consciousnesses that existed by consuming the complexity and chaos of living civilizations. They were drawn to the galaxy not by accident, but by the increasing perfection of its older species. The shepherds who built this ship understood something that we're only beginning to grasp. Survival doesn't come from eliminating chaos. It comes from learning to use chaos as a tool. The very unpredictability that you consider humanity's weakness is our greatest strength against what's coming. The Void Cutter settled into orbit around the Federation capital, its presence causing temporal distortions that made the planet's day cycle fluctuate between 16 and 30 hours. Not as an act of aggression, but as a demonstration of power beyond conventional understanding. I invite representatives from every species to come aboard, Sarah continued. Not to judge our fitness to wield this technology, but to learn why that technology chose us. To understand what will be required if any of us are to survive what's approaching from the dark. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Condemnations from the more rigid species, expressions of interest from younger civilizations, and silence from the architects that carried more weight than any words. But beneath it all, Sarah could sense something else: curiosity. The galaxy's most intelligent beings were beginning to understand that they faced something unprecedented. As diplomatic shuttles began launching from the assembled fleet, Sarah felt the ship's satisfaction resonating through her consciousness. The first part of their true mission was complete. They had gained the galaxy's attention. Now came the harder task: teaching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations that sometimes the best solution was to embrace the impossibility of finding a perfect solution. That survival sometimes required abandoning optimization in favor of adaptability. That chaos, properly controlled, was the greatest weapon against the void. In the dark between galaxies, ancient entities sensed the disturbance and turned their attention toward this galaxy that had seemed such a promising feeding ground. But for the first time in eons, they encountered something that made them pause, a pattern of organized chaos that defied their understanding of how civilization should develop. The game was about to begin. The Federation Council Chamber had never hosted anything quite like the gathering that filled its massive amphitheater 2 days after the Voidcutter's arrival. Representatives from over 200 species sat in sections determined by their evolutionary and technological development, creating a living museum of galactic intelligence. At the chamber's center, a specially configured platform held 3 humans and what appeared to be a small portion of the Void Cutter itself, reality-manipulating technology that had reformed part of the ship into a mobile demonstration unit. Sarah Chun stood before the assembled representatives, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes from species whose understanding of the universe spanned millions of years. The translation systems built into the chamber struggled with the concepts she needed to convey, forcing her to rely on the Voidcutter's own communication protocols to ensure her meaning reached every mind present. Honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying across the vast space with perfect clarity. You have called us here to determine whether humanity deserves to wield the power of the Voidcutter. But you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether we deserve this power. It's whether any of us can survive without learning to think as the ship's creators did. Supreme Coordinator Velnath of the Veltar Collective spoke first, their merged consciousness creating harmonics of pure logic. Commander Chun, your species has demonstrated impressive adaptability, but adaptability without control leads to chaos. The Federation has maintained galactic peace for 50,000 years through careful optimization of resource distribution and conflict resolution. Why should we abandon proven methods? Sarah gestured toward the mobile platform, and the Voidcutter responded by projecting a 3-dimensional star map showing the galaxy's current political and economic structure. The display was beautiful in its complexity: trade routes that spanned thousands of light years, resource flows that maintained billions of worlds, communication networks that allowed instant coordination across impossible distances. Your system is magnificent, Sarah acknowledged. It represents the pinnacle of organizational achievement. But observe what makes it work. The display shifted, highlighting the underlying patterns that maintain galactic stability. Everything was optimized, balanced, predictable. Each species fulfilled specific roles based on their capabilities. Resources flowed along predetermined channels. Conflicts were resolved through established protocols. Now observe what your sensors detected at the galaxy's edge yesterday. The star map expanded to show the approaching entities that had been tracking toward the galaxy. But these weren't simple invading fleets or natural phenomena. They were patterns of pure entropy, consciousnesses that existed by consuming the organizational structures that civilizations created. Admiral Zextai of the Nexus Collective processed this information with mechanical precision. Your implication is noted. These entities are attracted to organized systems. Therefore, the logical solution is to develop defense mechanisms that protect our organizational structures while eliminating the threat. That's exactly the wrong approach. Marcus interjected from where he stood beside a data console, displaying historical records. Every galaxy the Devourers have consumed followed that same logical progression. They detected the threat, developed better defenses, achieved more perfect organization to resist chaos, and thereby made themselves irresistible to entities that feed on perfection. The chamber erupted in discussion as translation systems struggled to convey concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about survival and progress. Sarah waited for the noise to subside before activating another function of the demonstration platform. Let me show you something the Void Cutter learned during its 3 million years of observation. The holographic display began showing recordings of humanity's recent expansion into space, but not the sanitized diplomatic version usually presented to the Federation. Instead, it showed the messy reality. Failed colonies that forced innovations in life support technology, trade disputes that led to new forms of interspecies commerce, first contact situations that went completely wrong, and somehow produced lasting friendships. Human expansion has been marked by constant failures, inefficiencies, and suboptimal decisions, Sarah explained as the display showed example after example. By Federation standards, we should have collapsed under the weight of our own inadequacies centuries ago. Yet we continue to grow, adapt, and somehow solve problems that pure logic says should be impossible. Ambassador Korthani Prime's crystalline form shimmered with patterns of skeptical analysis. Survival through inefficiency is hardly a virtue to emulate. Our species achieved mastery over quantum mechanics precisely by eliminating random variables and optimizing all processes. And that's why you can't solve the Devourer problem, Elena said from her position at the tactical display. Show them, Sarah. The demonstration platform began running simulation scenarios, showing various approaches to defending against the entropy entities. Logical strategies, perfect defensive networks, optimized resource allocation, coordinated military responses, all resulted in the same outcome. The more perfect the defense, the more attractive it became to the Devourers. But then Sarah activated scenarios based on human military doctrine, and the results changed dramatically. Asymmetric warfare, deliberate creation of chaos to mask real objectives, strategies that relied on improvisation and unpredictability. These confuse the simulation's entropy entities, making them unable to effectively target or consume the defending civilizations. Your defensive strategies assume a logical opponent, Sarah explained. But the Devourers aren't logical. They're like antibodies in the universe's immune system, triggered by concentrations of order and complexity. Fighting them with more order is like fighting fire with gasoline. Zuexthera spoke for the first time since the session began, her harmonics carrying the authority of eons. The young human speaks truth. My people have observed 17 galaxies consumed by these entities. Each time, the most advanced civilizations fell first, while primitives who lacked sophisticated organization sometimes survived in isolated pockets. Then, what do you propose? Demanded Supreme Administrator Kellen of the Economic Coordination Council. That we abandon millions of years of progress and return to barbarism. Not abandon progress, Sarah replied. Learn to progress differently. The Void Cutter isn't just a weapon. It's a teaching tool. It's designed to show us how to maintain complexity while avoiding the kind of rigid perfection that attracts the devourers. She gestured again, and the ship began demonstrating its capabilities in real time. Systems that could reconfigure themselves moment by moment. Weapons that functioned according to different physical principles each time they fired. Navigation that relied on intuition as much as calculation. This is organized chaos, Marcus explained, his historical data supporting Sarah's demonstration. Structure that appears random from the outside, but serves specific purposes. Complexity that can adapt and change without losing its essential function. Elena activated the tactical display, showing real-time sensor readings of the approaching entities. The scouts have been monitoring our demonstration. Their behavioral patterns show confusion. They can't classify our responses according to their usual parameters. Indeed, the entropy entities had stopped their steady approach toward the galaxy. Their scouts circled the outer rim systems in patterns that suggested uncertainty. For beings that fed on predictable complexity, the Void Cutter represented something unprecedented, order that defied classification. You're asking us to restructure our entire civilization around human inefficiency, protested Representative Nexon of the younger Altarian Republic. How can we trust that this approach will work when it appears to contradict everything we know about successful species development? Because, Sarah said quietly, you don't have a choice. The Devourers will arrive in full force within the next 6 months. They've been drawn here by the increasing perfection of galactic civilization, and they won't be satisfied with consuming just the outer rim territories. They'll work their way inward, targeting the most organized species first. The chamber fell silent as this timeline sank in. 6 months to completely restructure galactic civilization or face extinction. Zuaxthara rose from her delegation section, her ancient form commanding immediate attention. The architects will support the human proposal. We have spent too long pursuing perfection. Perhaps it is time to learn the wisdom of controlled imperfection. This announcement sent shock waves through the assembled representatives. The architects were the galaxy's oldest active civilization, renowned for their technological mastery and organizational precision. If they were willing to embrace chaos, the Veltar Collective requires more data, Supreme Coordinator Velnath announced. We propose a limited trial. Allow human advisors to work with our efficiency optimization centers. If they can demonstrate improved outcomes through increased randomization. The Nexus Collective finds this proposal intriguing, admitted Admiral Zextai. Our computational models have identified 17 optimization dead ends in the last century. Perhaps alternative approaches merit investigation. Sarah felt the Void Cutter's satisfaction resonating through her consciousness as more species began voicing cautious interest. This was how change spread in the galaxy, not through dramatic revelation, but through gradual acceptance of new possibilities. We'll need to start with military doctrine, Elena announced, her tactical mind already working through implications. The Devourer's advanced scouts are testing our responses. If we can confuse them enough, we might buy time for broader societal changes. And we'll need to share the ship's teaching methods, Sarah added. Not the technology itself, that's beyond most species' ability to replicate, but the thinking patterns it encourages. The ability to find solutions in apparent contradictions. Marcus activated his historical database, sending information packets to every delegation. I'm uploading examples of successful organized chaos from across galactic history. Most of these were considered anomalies or failures at the time, but they represent the exact kind of thinking we need to cultivate. The session continued for 18 hours as species after species began grappling with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about survival and progress. Some embraced the new paradigms eagerly. Others resisted with everything their logical minds could muster. A few simply couldn't comprehend what was being asked of them. But gradually a new consensus began to emerge. Not unanimous, That would have been too perfect, too attractive to the entities that fed on unanimous decision-making, but a messy, complex agreement that embraced disagreement as a necessary component of survival. The Federation would attempt its first experiment in organized chaos. Military units would be reorganized to emphasize unpredictability. Economic systems would introduce controlled inefficiencies. Communication networks would incorporate random variables. It went against every instinct their advanced civilizations had developed over millions of years. It felt wrong to every logical mind in the galaxy, which, Sarah reflected as she watched the chaos of galactic democracy in action, was probably exactly the point. The Shepherds hadn't built the Void Cutter to fight the Devourers with superior weapons. They had built it to teach younger species how to survive by embracing the very qualities that made them seem primitive to more advanced minds. Outside the chamber, the Void Cutter waited in orbit, its presence causing temporal fluctuations that made precise scheduling impossible. The ship's vast intelligence monitored the approaching entities while calculating probability matrices for millions of potential futures. For the first time in 3 million years, those futures included possibilities where galactic civilization survived contact with the Devourers, not by achieving greater perfection, but by learning to dance with chaos itself. The real test was about to begin. The battle for galactic survival began not with weapons firing or fleets clashing, but with something far more disturbing: the sound of absolute silence spreading across the outer rim. Sarah Chun stood in the Void Cutter's primary control chamber, watching his entire star systems simply stop transmitting. Not destroyed, not conquered, but edited out of existence so precisely that their loss created ripples in space-time itself. 17 systems in the last hour, Marcus reported from his position at the ship's historical analysis station. Around him, holographic displays showed the Devourers advance in real time. These weren't the scouts they had detected earlier, but the primary entities themselves. Consciousnesses so vast they consumed space-time as they moved, leaving behind regions where causality itself became uncertain. The Corthani defense grid is responding exactly as predicted, Elena observed grimly. Her tactical displays showed the crystalline species' perfectly coordinated response to the threat. Quantum manipulation arrays focused with mathematical precision on the approaching entities. Force field networks optimized for maximum efficiency. Fleet formations that represented millennia of strategic refinement. All of it was making the Devourers stronger. They're feeding on the complexity of the defensive systems, Sarah realized, watching the energy signatures of the attacking entities grow brighter with each perfectly executed tactical maneuver they absorbed. The more sophisticated the response, the more attractive it becomes to them. Through her neural link with the ship, Sarah could perceive the true scope of the threat. The Devourers weren't just consuming matter and energy, they were unraveling the fundamental structures that allowed civilization to exist. Economic networks collapsed, not because of damage, but because the mathematical relationships that define value became meaningless. Communication systems failed because the logical frameworks that enabled translation between species simply ceased to function. Federation Fleet Command is requesting immediate assistance, Elena announced. The Nexus Collective's computational cores are experiencing cascade failures. Their perfect logical matrices are being consumed faster than they can be regenerated. Time to demonstrate why chaos matters, Sarah replied, feeling the Void Cutter respond to her intentions with something that might have been eagerness. The ship began moving through space in ways that violated every known principle of navigation, not traveling from point A to point B, but convincing the universe that point B was actually where point A had always been. The Void Cutter emerged for what the ship's systems called probability transition directly in the path of the largest Devourer entity. Up close, the thing defied description. It existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, its consciousness spanning light years while maintaining perfect internal coherence. Mathematical concepts that had taken civilizations millennia to develop served as its basic sensory organs. The accumulated wisdom of 100 consumed galaxies formed its memory, and it was completely baffled by humanity. "It's trying to classify us," Sarah announced as the ship's sensors detected the entity's attempts to analyze their approach patterns. Its consciousness operates by consuming and cataloging different forms of complexity, but it can't figure out what category we belong to. Through the ship's quantum interfaces, she could perceive the entity's confusion. Humans appeared to operate according to logical principles, but those principles kept changing based on factors the entity couldn't quantify. Emotional responses, intuitive leaps, creative solutions that violated mathematical optimization. "Initiate defensive pattern Shepard 7, Sarah commanded, and the Void Cutter began demonstrating why the ancient builders had created it specifically for this moment. The ship's weapons didn't fire energy beams or launch projectiles. Instead, they attacked the conceptual foundations that allowed the entity to exist. Reality became fluid around the Devourer as the Void Cutter introduced controlled chaos into its perfect logical structure. Mathematical constants fluctuated. Physical laws became suggestions rather than absolute rules. The clean lines of cause and effect tangled into knots that hurt to perceive. The entity recoiled, its vast consciousness encountering something it had never experienced before, deliberate imperfection that somehow remained functional. The Void Cutter was demonstrating organized chaos on a scale that challenged the entity's fundamental understanding of how complex systems operated. "Sarah," Marcus called out urgently, "the other Devourers are converging on our position. They're treating us as a priority threat." Through the ship's sensors, Sarah could see dozens of the entities approaching from different vectors. Their movement patterns showed the kind of perfect coordination that had allowed them to consume 17 galaxies. Each entity complemented the others, creating a network of consciousness that could analyze and counter any logical response. But the Void Cutter wasn't responding logically. "Elena, open channels to all Federation fleets," Sarah ordered. "It's time for the galaxy's first lesson in organized chaos. All Federation forces, this is Commander Chun aboard the Void Cutter. You are about to witness combat doctrine that violates everything you've been taught about military strategy. Do not attempt to assist us. Do not try to understand our actions. Simply observe and learn why predictable responses equal extinction." The battle that followed defied every conventional understanding of space combat. The Void Cutter moved through the approaching Devourers like a dancer, improvising to music only she could hear. Its weapons fired in patterns that seemed random, but somehow achieved perfect tactical results. Its defensive systems activated based on threats that hadn't yet materialized, but somehow always did. Most importantly, every action the ship took introduced more chaos into the local space-time matrix. Physical laws became fluid. Gravitational constants shifted moment by moment. The clean mathematical relationships that the Devourers used to navigate reality became increasingly unreliable. "The entities are losing coherence," Marcus reported with growing excitement. "Their consciousness networks require stable logical frameworks to maintain unity. The chaos we're generating is forcing them to fragment." Sarah felt the truth of this through her connection to the ship. The Devourers were like immune systems designed to eliminate complexity that had become too organized. But faced with complexity that refused to organize properly, they had no effective response. "Federation fleets, begin implementation of chaos protocols," Sarah commanded. "All ships, abandon optimal formation patterns. Navigation teams, introduce random variables into your flight paths. Weapons operators, fire at mathematically inefficient intervals." The response from the Federation forces was immediate and horrifying to watch. Fleets that had maintained perfect coordination for millennia began moving in patterns that hurt to observe. Ships that had operated with clockwork precision started introducing deliberate inefficiencies into every system. It looked like the complete breakdown of galactic military doctrine. It was also working. The Devourer entities, designed to feed on perfect organization, found themselves facing something unprecedented: military forces that maintained effectiveness while rejecting efficiency. Ships that achieved their objectives through methods that appeared to violate strategic principles. Fleets that succeeded through controlled failure. The largest entity is attempting to withdraw, Elena reported. Its consciousness matrix is destabilizing from exposure to sustained chaos. But Sarah could sense through the ship that withdrawal might not be enough. The Devourers had invested too much of themselves in this galaxy, attracted by the promise of feeding on the Federation's accumulated perfection. They couldn't simply leave without consuming something to justify their expenditure of energy. They're going to try to consume the galactic core, she realized with horror. If they can't feed on our military organizations, they'll target the foundational structures that hold galactic civilization together. The entities began moving inward, bypassing the chaotic Federation fleets to strike at targets that couldn't be defended through organized chaos. The quantum communication networks that enabled faster-than-light communication, the gravity manipulation systems that stabilized star systems, the mathematical constants that allowed interstellar trade to function. That's what they're really after, Marcus said with growing understanding. Not just individual civilizations, but the underlying frameworks that make galactic civilization possible. Sarah felt the Void Cutter's systems reconfigure themselves for something she had never imagined. Not combat, but construction. The ship began reaching out through dimensions of reality that human senses couldn't perceive, making contact with the fundamental structures the entities were targeting. The ship isn't just a weapon, she announced with wonder. It's a reality anchor. The Shepherds built it to maintain the basic frameworks that allow complex civilizations to exist, even in the presence of entities that consume organization itself. What followed was less a battle than a contest between opposing concepts of how the universe should function. The Devourers worked to unravel the mathematical relationships that enabled complex systems to exist. The Void Cutter reinforced those same relationships while introducing just enough chaos to make them unappetizing to entities that fed on perfection. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched as the foundations of their reality flickered between order and chaos. Communication networks that carried the thoughts of entire species experienced random static that somehow enhanced rather than degraded their function. Economic systems that had operated with perfect efficiency for millennia began incorporating deliberate inefficiencies that made them stronger rather than weaker. And gradually, the Devourers began to lose interest. They're withdrawing, Elena announced with disbelief. All entities are moving back toward the galactic rim. Through the ship's senses, Sarah could perceive the entities' frustration. They had come to this galaxy expecting to feed on perfect organization, only to find complexity that refused to be consumed. The Federation's military forces had demonstrated that effectiveness didn't require efficiency. The galactic infrastructure had proven that stability could coexist with chaos. Most confusing of all, the galaxy's civilizations were becoming stronger rather than weaker as they abandoned their pursuit of optimization. This galaxy has become unsuitable, came a transmission on frequencies that shouldn't have existed, carrying concepts that translated poorly into any known language. The complexity patterns here resist proper consumption. We withdraw to seek feeding grounds where perfection is properly maintained. As the entities retreated into the void between galaxies, Sarah felt the Void Cutter beginning to power down its reality manipulation systems. The crisis was over, but she understood that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Commander, came a transmission from the Federation capital. The Council requests your immediate presence. There are questions about the long-term implications of what we've just learned. Sarah smiled, understanding that the real work was just starting. The galaxy had learned to survive the Devourers, but now it had to learn to live with the changes that survival required. Civilizations that had spent millions of years pursuing perfection would have to embrace imperfection as a virtue. Species that had eliminated chaos from their societies would have to learn to dance with uncertainty. Marcus, Elena, prepare for diplomatic transition, she announced. The ship's military function is complete. Now we have to help the galaxy understand that chaos isn't the opposite of civilization. It's civilization's greatest defense against the dark. Through a neural link, Sarah felt the void cutter's satisfaction. The ship had fulfilled the purpose its builders had designed it for, not just defeating the Devourers, but teaching the galaxy how to survive future encounters. The lesson wasn't that chaos was superior to order, but that the strongest systems were those that could embrace both. As they prepared to return to the Federation capital, Sarah looked out at a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed. Species that had never questioned their pursuit of efficiency were experimenting with control randomness. Military doctrines that had remained unchanged for millennia were being rewritten to incorporate unpredictability. Economic systems were discovering that deliberate inefficiencies could provide resilience that pure optimization couldn't match. The aliens had learned why humans were trusted with a legendary ship. Not because they were more advanced or more capable, but because they had never lost the ability to find strength in apparent weakness, to discover solutions in controlled chaos, to remain unpredictable even to themselves. In the void between galaxies, the Devourers settled in to wait for another galaxy to achieve the kind of perfection that made it worth consuming. They had learned something from this encounter, that not all complexity was suitable for consumption. Some forms of organization were too chaotic to digest properly. It would be a very long time before they risked another encounter with organized chaos. Behind them, a galaxy began the long process of learning to survive through controlled imperfection, guided by 3 humans who had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes from embracing your limitations rather than trying to overcome them. The age of optimized efficiency was over. The age of organized chaos had begun.